The gavel struck the mahogany sound block with a violence that made the entire courtroom flinch. Silence, thick and suffocating, descended instantly upon the gallery. Sorey sat alone at the defendant's table, her hands trembling as she clutched a single, crumpled tissue. Across the aisle, the Montgomery family, draped in designer black silk and smug satisfaction, already looked like victors. They had the expensive lawyers, the falsified documents, and the arrogance of old money. They had come to strip Sorey of everything, her home, her dignity, and her husband's legacy. But as the Honorable Judge Patterson adjusted his spectacles and leaned over the bench, a thin, yellowed document in his hand caught the light. He didn't look at the wealthy plaintiffs. He looked straight at Sorey. "Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery," the judge's voice boomed, "you seem to have overlooked Clause 4B. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sprawling lakeside estate, blurring the world outside into a smear of grey and green. Inside, the silence was louder than the storm. It had been 3 days since the funeral, 3 days since Liam had been lowered into the wet earth, and 3 days since Sorey had felt the warmth of a human touch. Sorey stood in the center of the living room, a space that used to echo with Liam's laughter and the clinking of wine glasses during their Friday night dinners. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. She stared at the empty spot above the fireplace where Liam's portrait had hung just yesterday. It was gone. The sound of the front door unlatching shattered her trance. She turned, expecting to see Arthur, Liam's old friend and their family attorney, who had promised to stop by. Instead, the heavy oak doors swung open to reveal Beatrice and Preston Montgomery, Liam's parents. Beatrice shook her umbrella off on the pristine marble foyer, not caring where the water splattered. She wore a black veil that did little to hide the sharp, predatory gleam in her eyes. Preston, a man who wore his wealth like armor, stood behind her, checking his gold pocket watch as if he had a train to catch. "Beatrice? Preston?" Sorey's voice was raspy from days of crying. I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Beatrice didn't answer immediately. She walked past Sorey, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, and ran a gloved finger along the back of the velvet sofa. She inspected the dust on her fingertip with a sneer. "We aren't here for a social call, Sorey," Beatrice said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "And quite frankly, looking at the state of you, it's embarrassing." Sorey looked down at her attire, Liam's oversized sweater and sweatpants. She hadn't slept or showered properly since the accident. "I'm grieving, Beatrice. I lost my husband." "And we lost a son," Preston barked, stepping into the room. "A son who made a terrible mistake marrying beneath him." The air left the room. Sorey stiffened. They had never liked her, she knew that. To the Montgomerys, a graphic designer from a middle-class suburb was nothing more than a gold digger sinking her claws into their heir. But they had tolerated her for Liam's sake. Now that Liam was gone, the truce was evidently over. "I think you should leave," Sorey said, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm not in the mood for insults." Beatrice laughed, a cold, brittle sound. She reached into her Hermes handbag and pulled out a thick envelope. She tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "We aren't leaving, dear," Beatrice said, a cruel smile curling her lips. "You are." Sorey stared at the envelope. "What is that?" "An eviction notice," Preston said matter-of-factly, "and a restraining order barring you from dissipating any assets of the Montgomery estate." "This is our house," Sorey argued, stepping forward. "Liam and I bought this place together. His name is on the deed, and so is mine." "Was," Beatrice corrected. "Past tense." Sorey's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you talking about? Liam came to us, Beatrice lied, her eyes unblinking. 2 weeks before the accident. He realized the marriage was failing. He realized you were only after the money. He signed over his portion of the deed to the family trust to protect the assets. Since the house is now majority owned by the Montgomery Trust, and you have no financial contribution on record that matches the valuation, you are trespassing. That's a lie, Sorey screamed. Liam would never do that. We were happy. We were planning a trip to Italy next month. Plans change, Preston said, pulling a cigar from his jacket, though he didn't light it. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Take your clothes and your personal trinkets. Leave the furniture, the jewelry, the cars, and the artwork. Those belong to the family. I'm not going anywhere, Sorey stated, backing away. I'm calling Arthur. Arthur? Beatrice scoffed. That senile old fool? Go ahead, but he can't argue with a notarized transfer of deed signed by Liam himself. Beatrice took a step closer, invading Sorey's personal space. The scent of expensive, overpowering perfume filled Sorey's nose, making her nauseous. Listen to me, you little leech, Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You thought you won the lottery when you married my son. You thought you were set for life, but you were just a phase, a rebellious phase. Now that he's gone, we are scrubbing his life clean of mistakes. And you are the biggest mistake of all. Sorey felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of these vultures. Get out of my house, Sorey whispered. 24 hours, Preston repeated, checking his watch again. The movers will be here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. If you're not gone, the police will be. The Montgomerys turned and marched out the front door, leaving the envelope on the table. The heavy thud of the door closing echoed like a gunshot. Sorey stood frozen for a long minute. Then, with shaking hands, she reached for the envelope. She tore it open. Inside was a copy of a deed transfer, dated 14 days ago. At the bottom, in blue ink, was a signature. Liam Montgomery. It looked exactly like his handwriting. Sorey collapsed onto the floor, clutching the paper to her chest, and for the first time since the accident, she screamed. The next morning came with the brutality of a sledgehammer. Sorey hadn't slept. She had spent the night tearing through her filing cabinets, looking for the original deed, looking for anything that could prove Beatrice wrong. But the safe in the study, where they kept their important documents, was empty. Someone had been there. At 7:55 a.m., a convoy of black trucks rolled up the long driveway. Men in grey uniforms hopped out, carrying boxes and packing tape. Leading them was not Preston, but a man Sorey didn't recognize. He was tall, thin, and wore a pinstripe suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. He had the face of a man who enjoyed delivering bad news. Sorey opened the door before they could knock. She was dressed in jeans and a sturdy jacket. She held a cup of cold coffee. Mrs. Montgomery? The man asked. Or should I say, Ms. Sullivan? He used her maiden name. The insult was calculated. I am Sorey Montgomery, she corrected, blocking the doorway. Who are you? My name is Jonathan Reed. I represent the Montgomery Family Trust, he said, handing her a business card. I'm here to oversee the transition of the property. There is no transition, Sorey said. I spoke to my lawyer last night. You cannot evict a widow from her marital home without a court order. The document Beatrice gave me is a photocopy. It proves nothing. Reed smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We anticipated you might be difficult, which is why we obtained an emergency injunction this morning from Judge Holloway. He produced a folded court order. Sorey scanned it. Emergency order of protection for assets. It claimed that Sorey was mentally unstable and a flight risk with valuable family heirlooms. Judge Holloway? Soray asked, her blood running cold. Judge Holloway was Preston Montgomery's golf partner. They belonged to the same country club. The law moves quickly when significant assets are at risk, Reed said smoothly. Now please step aside. My team has a job to do. No, Soray said, grabbing the doorframe. This is corruption. You can't just... 2 large security guards stepped up behind Reed. They didn't touch her, but their presence was a clear threat. Soray, a familiar voice called out from the driveway. She looked past the movers. Arthur was parking his battered Volvo behind the sleek black trucks. He got out, leaning heavily on his cane, his white hair wind-blown. Arthur had been Liam's grandfather's lawyer, a man of integrity in a town that had forgotten the meaning of the word. "Arthur!" Soray cried out, relief washing over her. "Hold it right there!" Arthur shouted, limping toward the porch. "Reed, I might have known I'd find a bottom feeder like you here." "Arthur," Reed nodded dismissively, "you're out of your depth. We have an injunction." "I don't care if you have a papal bull from the Vatican," Arthur growled, stepping onto the porch to stand beside Soray. "You are not throwing this girl out on the street without due process. This injunction is based on hearsay." "It's based on a signed affidavit from Beatrice Montgomery, stating that Soray threatened to burn the house down," Reed said. "What?" Soray gasped. "I never said that." "It doesn't matter what is true, only what can be proven in court," Reed said. "And right now, the court says you leave." Arthur placed a hand on Soray's shoulder. His grip was frail but comforting. "Let them have the house for today, Soray. It's just brick and mortar. We will fight them on the battleground that matters." "But Arthur, the signature," Soray whispered. It looked real. Arthur looked at her, his blue eyes sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Soray, did Liam love you?" "More than anything," she choked out. "Did he trust his parents?" "He hated them. He spent his whole life trying to get away from their control." "Then he didn't sign that paper," Arthur said firmly. "Or if he did, he didn't know what he was signing. We are going to pack your bag, we are going to get in my car, and we are going to prepare for war." Soray looked at the house one last time. The movers were already pushing past them, their muddy boots staining the foyer. She saw one of them grab a vase, a gift Liam had bought her on their first anniversary, and toss it carelessly into a box. She felt a fire ignite in her chest. It wasn't grief anymore, it was rage. Pure, white-hot rage. "Okay," Soray said, turning to Reed. "I'll leave. But tell Beatrice something for me." Reed raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "Tell her she better enjoy the view," Soray said, her voice dropping an octave. "Because when I come back, I'm not just taking the house, I'm taking everything." Reed chuckled as if she had told a joke. A bold threat for a woman with no money and no home. Soray walked past him, head held high, and got into Arthur's Volvo. As they drove away, she watched in the side mirror as the vultures descended on her life. "Where do we go?" Soray asked, as the estate disappeared from view. "My office," Arthur said, shifting gears. "We need to look at the hidden archives." "The what?" "Liam's grandfather, Old Man Montgomery," Arthur said with a wry smile. "He was a paranoid old coot, hated Beatrice. He thought she was a viper. Before he died, he left a series of stipulations in the family archives. Documents that Beatrice and Preston don't know exist because they were too busy counting their inheritance to read the fine print." "Do you think there's something in there that can help?" "I don't know," Arthur admitted. "But if I know Old Man Montgomery, he left a landmine somewhere for his daughter-in-law. We just have to find the trigger." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the car. The battle had begun, but the Montgomerys had made a critical error. They assumed Sorey was weak because she was kind. They were about to learn that the most dangerous creature on earth is a woman who has lost everything and has nothing left to lose. The windshield wipers of Arthur's Volvo fought a losing battle against the torrential downpour as they pulled up to a nondescript brick building in the downtown district. Unlike the glass and steel skyscrapers that housed firms like the one Jonathan Reed worked for, Arthur's office looked like a relic from a noir film. It was wedged between a dry cleaner and a bakery, the gold lettering on the window peeling slightly. "It's not much," Arthur grunted, struggling to get out of the car with his bad knee. "But the coffee is strong, and the rent is paid." Sorey followed him inside. The office smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and pipe tobacco. It was lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been organized since the Reagan administration. "Sit," Arthur commanded, pointing to a leather armchair that had seen better days. "I'm going to make some calls. You need to call the bank." Sorey nodded, pulling out her phone. Her hands were still shaking. She dialed the number for the private banking division she and Liam used. "Hello, this is Sorey Montgomery. I'm trying to access my checking account, but my card was declined at a gas station on the way here." There was a pause on the line, followed by the clicking of a keyboard. "One moment, Mrs. Montgomery. Ah, yes. I see the flag here. I'm afraid all accounts associated with the Social Security number, ending in 88842, have been frozen pending a fraud investigation." "Fraud?" Sorey's voice rose. "What fraud? I'm the joint owner." The primary account holder, the late Mr. Liam Montgomery, reportedly filed a suspicious activity report prior to his death, the banker said, his voice rehearsed and robotic. "We received a notarized confirmation from the executor of his estate, Mr. Preston Montgomery, instructing us to freeze assets until the probate court resolves the dispute." "My husband didn't file any report," Sorey yelled into the phone. "This is a setup. They are starving me out." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I cannot discuss this further. You will need to speak to the executor." The line went dead. Sorey dropped the phone into her lap. She felt a cold pit in her stomach. "They froze everything, Arthur. Even my personal savings. I have $40 in cash. That's it." Arthur slammed the phone receiver down on his own desk. "Vultures. They know you can't hire a defense team if you can't pay a retainer. Beatrice is playing 4D chess while we're playing checkers." He limped over to a massive, rusted filing cabinet in the corner. It was locked with a heavy padlock. Arthur fished a key from his watch pocket, a small brass key that looked ancient. "Liam's grandfather Theodore was a hard man," Arthur said, turning the key. The lock clicked open. "He built the Montgomery Empire from dirt. He knew his son Preston was weak, and he knew Beatrice was greedy. When Theodore died 10 years ago, he left the bulk of the estate to Preston, but he left the control mechanisms in a separate trust." Arthur pulled out a dusty, leather-bound ledger and a metal box. "Everyone thinks the Montgomery wealth is in stocks and bonds," Arthur explained, blowing dust off the box. "But the real power lies in the land rights and the patent holdings. Theodore didn't trust Preston with those. He created a legacy clause in the family charter." "What does that mean for me?" Sorey asked, leaning forward. "It means," Arthur said, opening the ledger, "that Theodore anticipated a situation exactly like this. He hated the idea of the family tearing itself apart for money. He told me once, 'Arthur, if that woman, meaning Beatrice, ever tries to cut the heart out of this family, you open the red file.'" Arthur flipped through the yellowed pages until he found a thick red envelope glued to the back cover. It was sealed with wax. "I haven't opened this in a decade," Arthur whispered. He used a letter opener to slice the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on a typewriter, and a small digital flash drive, an early model, bulky and grey. Arthur put on his reading glasses. He read the paper silently, his eyebrows knitting together. Then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "What is it?" Sorey asked. "Theodore was smarter than I thought," Arthur chuckled. "This is a directive regarding the true heir. It stipulates that in the event of the primary heir's death, Liam, the estate doesn't automatically revert to the parents. It passes to the chosen partner, provided that partner can prove undue duress by the family. But they have the deed transfer," Sorey pointed out. "They have a document saying Liam left me." "That is where this comes in," Arthur said, holding up the flash drive. Theodore recorded all his board meetings, all his private confrontations with Beatrice. He kept a log of their character. It's not direct evidence for your case, but it establishes a pattern of behavior. It proves Beatrice has a history of forging documents. Is that enough to win in court? No, Arthur admitted, his smile fading slightly. It's enough to get us a hearing, but not a verdict. To win, we need to prove Liam's signature on that eviction notice is a fake. And for that, we need the notary. Arthur pointed to the photocopy of the deed Beatrice had thrown at Sorey. "Look at the stamp. Commissioned to Loretta Higgins. I know Loretta. She's a clerk at the downtown courthouse. If she notarized this, she either saw Liam sign it, or she was paid off," Sorey finished. "Exactly," Arthur said, grabbing his coat. "We aren't going to wait for the court date. We are going to pay Mrs. Higgins a visit. Tonight." Loretta Higgins lived in a run-down apartment complex on the south side of the city, a stark contrast to the Montgomery estate. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle, casting a gloom over the graffiti-stained walls. Sorey drove Arthur's car. The old lawyer was too tired to navigate the night traffic. They parked across the street from Building 4B. "Let me do the talking," Arthur said. "Loretta is skittish. If she thinks we're threatening her, she'll clam up." They climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 302. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. Arthur knocked 3 times. "Who is it?" a voice croaked from behind the door. "Loretta, it's Arthur Pendleton. Open up." There was the sound of a chain sliding, and the door cracked open. Loretta Higgins was a woman in her 50s, with dyed red hair showing grey roots, and eyes that darted nervously from Arthur to Sorey. She wore a faded bathrobe. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, clutching the robe tighter. I didn't think you practiced law anymore." "I don't, usually. Unless I smell a rat," Arthur said, pushing the door gently. "We need to talk about the Montgomery deed." Loretta's face drained of color. "I can't talk about that. Client confidentiality." "There is no confidentiality in fraud, Loretta," Arthur said, his voice hard. "This is Sorey Montgomery, the woman you helped throw out of her home." Loretta looked at Sorey. For a second, Sorey saw shame in the woman's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "I didn't do anything wrong," Loretta stammered. "Mr. Montgomery came in. He signed the paper. I stamped it. That's it." "Liam came to you?" Sorey stepped forward, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "My husband, tall, blue eyes, walked with a slight limp from a college football injury." Loretta blinked. He was sitting down. I didn't see him walk." "When was this?" Arthur pressed. "The date on the stamp says October 14th. "Yes, October 14th, around 2 p.m. Sorey gasped. "That's impossible." "Why?" Loretta asked defensively. "Because on October 14th at 2 p.m., Liam was in surgery," Sorey said, tears welling up. "He was getting his appendix removed at St. Jude's Hospital. I was holding his hand while he was under anesthesia." The hallway went silent. Loretta's lip quivered. I have the hospital records, Loretta, Arthur bluffed, though he knew he could get them. If I bring those to the district attorney, you aren't just losing your license. You're going to prison for forgery and conspiracy, 5 to 10 years. Loretta began to cry. She backed into her apartment, and they followed her in. The living room was cluttered with boxes of new electronics, a large flat-screen TV, a new gaming console, expensive handbags, items that a court clerk's salary couldn't cover. "They made me," Loretta sobbed, collapsing onto her sofa. "Mrs. Montgomery, Beatrice. She came here. She said she'd ruin me. She said she knew about my son's drug charge." "So she blackmailed you?" Arthur asked, pulling out a voice recorder from his pocket. "Tell me exactly what happened." "She brought the document already signed," Loretta confessed, wiping her nose. "She said it was Liam's signature, but he was too sick to come in. She gave me $5,000 cash and promised to make my son's legal troubles disappear if I just stamped the paper. I needed the money, Mr. Pendleton." "You sold my life for $5,000? Sore whispered, looking at the woman with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I'm sorry," Loretta wailed. "Being sorry won't fix this," Arthur said, clicking off the recorder, "but testifying will." "I can't!" Loretta shrieked. "Beatrice said if I ever spoke up, she'd have me killed. You don't know her connections. She knows judges. She knows police captains. And I know the law," Arthur said firmly. "We are going to put you in protective custody, but you have to sign an affidavit right now, stating that Liam never appeared before you." Loretta shook her head violently. "No. Get out. If they see you here—" Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. Loretta's eyes went wide. "They're watching me," she whispered, terrified. "Go! Through the fire escape!" "Who is watching you?" Sore asked. Bam! The front door of the apartment was kicked open. 2 men in dark raincoats stood there. One was Jonathan Reed, the lawyer. The other was a large man Sore didn't recognize, his face obscured by a hood. "Mr. Pendleton," Reed said smoothly, stepping over the broken door jamb. "Harassing a witness? That's a disbarable offense." "It's not harassment if she's confessing to a crime, Reed," Arthur said, standing in front of Sore. Reed looked at Loretta, who was cowering in the corner. "Loretta, dear, are these people bothering you? Did they force you to say things that aren't true?" Loretta looked at Reed, then at the large man behind him. The man adjusted his coat, revealing the handle of a pistol tucked into his belt. Loretta squeezed her eyes shut. "Yes," she screamed. "They forced me. They threatened me. I don't know what they're talking about." Sore felt the world tilt. "Loretta, tell the truth." "She just did," Reed smiled, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police. Trespassing and witness tampering. I suggest you leave before the sirens start, Arthur. You're too old for a jail cell." Arthur grabbed Sore's arm. "Come on." "But she confessed," Sore protested, as Arthur dragged her toward the kitchen window and the fire escape. "It doesn't matter," Arthur hissed. "She's compromised. If we stay, they'll plant something on us. We have to go. Now." They scrambled out onto the rusted metal balcony and down the ladder into the rain-slicked alleyway, just as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Sore hit the pavement hard, scraping her hands. She looked up at Arthur, her hair plastered to her face. "We lost the witness," she said, her voice hollow. "We have the hospital records, but without her testimony, they'll claim Liam signed it before the surgery." "We lost a pawn," Arthur corrected, helping her up. "But we learned something valuable." "What?" "Beatrice is scared," Arthur said, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "She's watching the notary because she knows it's the weak link. And if she's watching Loretta, she's not watching the one place that actually matters. Where is that? The safe deposit box, Arthur said. Liam had a private box at the First National Bank, not the joint one, a personal one. He mentioned it to me in passing years ago. He said, "If anything ever happens to me, tell Soray to check box 404. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because I didn't think we'd need it, Arthur said. But now we have no choice. The trial is in 3 days, Soray, and we are going to walk into that courtroom with a bomb strapped to our chests." Soray looked at the dark alley, the flashing lights reflecting off the wet brick. She was done crying. Beatrice wanted a war? She was going to get one. "Let's go get box 404, Soray said. The First National Bank was a fortress of granite and steel, standing imposing in the center of the financial district. It was the kind of place where money didn't just talk, it whispered commands that ruined lives. Arthur parked the Volvo 3 blocks away to avoid detection. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed in a cold, grey light. Soray checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red, but her jaw was set. She wore a simple black suit she had managed to retrieve from the dry cleaners before her credit cards were frozen. It was her armor. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked, checking the time. It was 9 a.m. The bank had just opened. "No," Soray admitted. "But let's do it anyway." "Remember," Arthur instructed, as they walked briskly toward the entrance. The freeze order applies to the estate accounts. Safety deposit boxes are a grey area. Unless the court order specifically lists the box number, the bank manager has discretion. We have to count on the fact that Beatrice doesn't know box 404 exists. They pushed through the revolving doors. The air inside was cool and smelled of money. A security guard nodded at them. They approached the front desk. "We need to access a safety deposit box," Arthur told the teller, sliding his Bar Association card across the marble counter. "Arthur Pendleton, attorney at law, acting on behalf of Mrs. Soray Montgomery." The teller typed something into her computer. Her smile faltered. "1 moment, please." She picked up the phone. Soray's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the teller glance at them nervously. A moment later, a heavy door behind the counter opened, and a man in a grey suit walked out. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager. "Mr. Pendleton," Henderson said, his voice tight. "And Mrs. Montgomery, I was alerted to your presence. As you know, there is a freeze on the Montgomery assets. I am aware of the injunction on the liquid assets and the property," Arthur said, his voice projecting confident authority. "However, I have reviewed the court order. It lists checking accounts, savings, and investment portfolios. It does not list safety deposit box 404. Henderson adjusted his tie. "That may be a technicality, Arthur, but given the high profile of this dispute, I really should call the executor before allowing access." "If you call Preston Montgomery," Arthur said, leaning in close, "you will be violating the privacy agreement signed by the original box holder, Liam Montgomery. That box is not part of the probate estate until a judge declares it so. Right now, Mrs. Montgomery has the key and the authorization as the surviving spouse. If you deny her access, I will sue this bank for obstruction of justice and unlawful seizure, and I will make sure it's on the front page of the City Chronicle tomorrow." Henderson paled. He looked at Soray, then at Arthur. He knew Arthur's reputation. The old man might be retired, but he was a pit bull. "Fine," Henderson sighed, "but I have to supervise the visit, and you cannot remove anything valuable, gold, cash, or jewelry. Only documents." "Agreed," Soray said quickly. They followed Henderson down a spiral staircase, into the vault. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing rows of metal drawers. Henderson unlocked the master mechanism for box 404, and Sore produced the small, silver key she had found on Liam's spare keychain, the one she had kept in her purse for years, never knowing what it opened. She turned the key. The lock clicked. Sore pulled the long metal box out and carried it to a private viewing table. Henderson stood by the door, watching like a hawk. Sore's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. It wasn't empty. Inside there was no money, no jewelry. There was a thicker blue folder, a flash drive, and a small velvet pouch. Sore opened the pouch first. Inside was a simple silver ring, Liam's college ring, and a note. "Soph, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. I'm sorry I left you alone with them. But I didn't leave you defenseless." Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away furiously and opened the blue folder. The title on the first page made her gasp. "The Shadow Trust, Revocable Living Trust of Liam Montgomery." Arthur read over her shoulder, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. "I'll be damned," he whispered. He didn't trust them either. He moved the assets out of his name years ago. "What does this mean?" Sore whispered. "It means," Arthur said, a grin forming on his face, "that the house, the cars, the money, they didn't belong to Liam when he died. They belonged to this trust. And look who the sole beneficiary is." Sore looked at the line Arthur pointed to. Beneficiary. Sore Montgomery. "But wait," Sore pointed to a clause at the bottom. "It says the trust is only valid if Clause 4B is satisfied." "Clause 4B?" Arthur frowned. He flipped the pages frantically. "Where is the appendix? It's missing." They searched the box. No appendix, just the main document. "It's not here," Sore panicked. "Without that clause, the trust might be void." "Mr. Pendleton," Henderson called out from the door, "I just received a call from corporate legal. They are ordering me to seal the vault immediately. Mr. Jonathan Reed is on his way with a police escort." "We have to go," Arthur said, shoving the folder and the flash drive into his briefcase. "You can't take those," Henderson shouted, stepping forward. "They are documents, Henderson. You said documents were allowed." Arthur barked. He grabbed Sore's arm. "Move!" They rushed past the manager, who was too timid to physically stop them. They sprinted up the spiral stairs. As they burst into the lobby, they saw flashing lights through the glass doors. A police cruiser and a black sedan were pulling up to the curb. Jonathan Reed was stepping out of the sedan. "Back door!" Arthur yelled. They scrambled toward the rear exit, past the break room, and out into the alleyway where the dumpsters were kept. They heard the front doors of the bank crash open and voices shouting orders. Arthur wheezed as they ran toward his car, parked a block over. We need to read that drive." "Arthur, your heart," Sore said, supporting him as he stumbled. "My heart is fine," Arthur lied, his face grey. "My pride is hurt, running down alleys at 75 years old." They reached the Volvo. Sore shoved Arthur into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. She peeled away from the curb just as Reed and two officers rounded the corner. They had the trust, but they were missing the key to unlock it. Clause 4B. "Where would the appendix be?" Sore asked, merging into traffic, her heart racing like a trapped bird. Arthur closed his eyes, clutching the folder. The judge. The original copy would have been filed with a judge for safekeeping to prevent tampering. A blind filing. Liam was brilliant. Which judge? Arthur opened his eyes. The only one in this town that Beatrice couldn't buy. Judge Patterson. But Patterson is presiding over our eviction hearing tomorrow. Exactly, Arthur smiled grimly. Liam set the stage. Now we just have to survive the performance. The courtroom was packed. It seemed the entire town had turned out to watch the fall of the outsider who had dared to marry the Montgomery heir. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras ready to capture Sore's humiliation. On the plaintiff's side, the Montgomerys looked like royalty. Beatrice wore a black suit that cost more than Sore's childhood home. Preston sat stone-faced, checking his watch. Jonathan Reed, their shark of a lawyer, was arranging his papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an amputation. Sore sat at the defendant's table. She felt small. Arthur sat beside her, looking frailer than he had the day before. The chase at the bank had taken a toll on him. He was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he poured water from the pitcher. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Patterson entered. He was a stern man, with a face carved from granite and bushy white eyebrows that seemed to weigh his every thought. He took the bench and surveyed the courtroom. "This is the matter of Montgomery Estate verse Sore Montgomery," Judge Patterson's voice boomed. "Regarding the emergency eviction and asset reclamation. Mr. Reed, you may proceed." Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at the judge, he played to the audience. "Your Honor," Reed began, his voice smooth as silk. "This case is tragic, not because of the death of Liam Montgomery, but because of the deception that followed it. We are here to prove that the defendant, Sore Montgomery, has no legal claim to the estate. We have evidence that the late Mr. Montgomery initiated divorce proceedings and transferred his assets back to his parents before his untimely death. Reed spent the next 2 hours systematically destroying Sore's life. He painted her as a manipulator who had isolated Liam from his loving family. He brought up credit card bills showing lavish spending, which were actually for Liam's medical treatments. He called witnesses, neighbors who had been paid to say they heard shouting matches. Then he called Loretta Higgins. Sore watched as the notary walked to the stand. Loretta looked terrified. She refused to make eye contact with Sore. "Mrs. Higgins," Reed said gently, "do you recognize this document?" "Yes," Loretta whispered. "It's the deed transfer." "And did you witness Liam Montgomery sign it?" Loretta hesitated. She looked at Beatrice, who was staring at her with cold, dead eyes. Then she looked at the large man in the back of the room, the same thug from her apartment. "Yes," Loretta lied, her voice cracking. "He came to my office. He signed it." "Thank you," Reed said. "No further questions." Arthur stood up slowly. "Cross-examination, Your Honor." Arthur limped to the podium. "Mrs. Higgins, you stated Liam came to your office. Did he drive himself?" I assume so." "Did he seem in pain?" "No." Arthur held up a piece of paper. "I have here the surgical records from St. Jude's Hospital. At the exact time you claim he was in your office, Liam was in recovery from an appendectomy. He was unable to walk. How do you explain that?" "Objection!" Reed shouted. "Those records are unverified." "They are certified hospital copies," Arthur roared back, finding his strength. "Sustained," Judge Patterson said, eyeing Reed. "The records are admissible. Mrs. Higgins, answer the question." Loretta began to cry. I might have the time wrong. Maybe it was the day before." "You swore under oath it was the 14th, Arthur pressed. "Are you lying now? Or were you lying then?" "Objection! He's badgering the witness," Reed yelled. "I am exposing a perjury," Arthur shouted. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this entire case is built on a forgery. The deed is fake. The eviction is illegal. We move for immediate dismissal." The courtroom buzzed. Beatrice looked furious. She whispered something to Reed. Reed stood up, looking unbothered. "Your Honor, even if, and that is a big if, the date on the notary stamp is a clerical error. The signature is genuine. We have a handwriting expert who will testify that it is Liam's hand. Furthermore, the deed is secondary. The law states that without a will, assets revert to the next of kin if the marriage is contested, and we have a signed affidavit from Liam stating the marriage was over. Another forgery, Sore shouted, standing up. Sit down, Mrs. Montgomery, the judge snapped. Reed smiled. We ask for a ruling, Your Honor. The defense has produced no counter-evidence of ownership. No will, no trust, nothing to supersede the family's claim. Judge Patterson looked at Arthur. Mr. Pendleton, do you have anything other than the hospital records? Disproving the time doesn't necessarily disprove the signature. Arthur looked at Sore. It was time. We do, Your Honor, Arthur said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out the blue folder they had stolen from the bank. We have the Shadow Trust, Arthur announced. The room went silent. Beatrice gasped audibly. This is a revocable trust established by Liam Montgomery 3 years ago, Arthur continued, walking the file up to the bench. It places all assets, the house, the accounts, the patent rights, into a protected entity, and it names Sore Montgomery as the sole beneficiary, effectively bypassing probate and the parents entirely. Reed turned pale. He ran over to the bench. This is a surprise introduction of evidence. We haven't seen this. Because your clients froze the box where it was kept, Arthur retorted. Judge Patterson put on his spectacles and opened the blue folder. He read in silence for a long, agonizing minute. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like thunder. Finally, the judge looked up. He didn't look happy. Mr. Pendleton, the judge said heavily, this is indeed a valid trust document. However, it is incomplete. Sore felt the blood drain from her face. Clause 4B, the judge said, tapping the paper. The validity of this trust is contingent upon the satisfaction of Clause 4B. The document says, see Appendix A. There is no Appendix A in this folder. We couldn't find it, Your Honor, Arthur admitted, but the intent is clear. Intent is not law, Arthur, Judge Patterson said, closing the folder. Without that clause, I cannot verify if the conditions of the trust have been met. For all I know, Clause 4B requires Sore to have been married for 10 years or to have children. Without it, the trust is dormant. Beatrice let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. Reed smirked, his confidence returning. Exactly, Your Honor, Reed said. It's a useless piece of paper, a draft. Liam obviously never finalized it. Judge Patterson sighed. He looked at Sore with genuine sympathy. Mrs. Montgomery, without the appendix defining Clause 4B, I have no choice. I must rule on the evidence currently before me. The deed transfer, while the date is contested, stands as the only active legal document regarding the property. He picked up his gavel. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiffs, Judge Patterson began. Sore Montgomery is ordered to vacate the premises by— Wait! The voice didn't come from Arthur. It didn't come from Sore. It came from the back of the courtroom. A young clerk, out of breath and disheveled, burst through the double doors. He was carrying a thin, yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. Judge Patterson! The clerk shouted, ignoring the bailiff trying to stop him. A filing, a blind filing from the archives. It was flagged to be released only if the Shadow Trust was presented in open court. The clerk ran down the aisle and handed the envelope to the judge. Judge Patterson looked at the seal. It's Liam Montgomery's personal seal, he murmured. He tore open the envelope. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Reed scrambled forward. Objection. What is this? Sit down, Mr. Reed, Judge Patterson commanded, his voice shaking the walls. The judge read the paper. His eyes widened. He read it again. Then He looked up at Beatrice and Preston Montgomery. His expression changed from neutral to disgusted. "Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery," the judge's voice boomed, "you seem to have overlooked Clause 4B. "What is it?" Beatrice snapped, losing her composure. "What does it say?" Judge Patterson held up the paper. Clause 4B states, "In the event that my death is sudden, and my parents, Beatrice and Preston Montgomery, attempt to seize my assets from my wife, this trust becomes active immediately. Furthermore, if they produce any document claiming I wish to divorce Sorey, that document is to be considered fraudulent, as I hereby swear under penalty of perjury that I will love her until my dying breath." The judge paused, letting the words sink in. But he wasn't done. "And," the judge continued, a small smile playing on his lips, "it includes a digital key code." "A key code," Sorey whispered. "To the monitoring system Liam installed in the estate," the judge read. "It seems Liam installed hidden cameras and microphones in the main office and the living room 3 years ago. The footage uploads to a remote server. The clause gives the court permission to access the footage from the dates leading up to his death, and the dates following it." Beatrice screamed. It was a high, shrill sound of pure terror. She lunged for the door, but the bailiff blocked her path. "Bailiff," Judge Patterson said, his voice cold as ice. "Lock the doors. We are going to watch a movie." The bailiff dimmed the courtroom lights. A heavy, suffocating silence pressed down on the gallery as the projection screen descended. Judge Patterson typed the key code from the yellowed letter, and the screen flickered to life. Timestamp: October 14th, 8:30 p.m. The video feed showed the Montgomery study. Liam was absent. Instead, Beatrice, Preston, and Jonathan Reed stood in the center of the frame. The audio was crystal clear, cutting through the courtroom like a knife. "It's done," Beatrice's voice echoed from the speakers. On screen, she poured a drink. "I practiced his signature all morning. It's close enough. We just need a notary who keeps her mouth shut." "Liam threw us out," Reed argued on the recording. "He didn't sign anything." "It doesn't matter," Preston sneered, adjusting his tie. "We'll crush that waitress in court. By the time she realizes what happened, she'll be living in a cardboard box." The screen went black. The lights flared back on. The exposure was total. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Judge Patterson stood, his face a thundercloud. "In 30 years, I have never seen such a calculated, heartless dismantling of a grieving widow's life." "It's fake!" Beatrice shrieked, jumping to her feet. "It's AI-generated. Liam never installed cameras." "Sit down," Patterson roared, slamming his gavel hard enough to crack the handle. "The evidence is undeniable. The deed is a forgery." He turned his gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Reed, you are in contempt. Officers, take him into custody. I am referring you to the state bar for immediate disbarment." Reed didn't resist. He hung his head as the cuffs clicked, his arrogance finally extinguished. "As for the plaintiffs," Patterson continued, turning to the parents, "I am vacating the eviction order immediately. The property belongs to Sorey Montgomery. Furthermore, I am issuing bench warrants for Beatrice and Preston Montgomery for grand larceny, fraud, and conspiracy." Chaos erupted. Beatrice screamed as officers grabbed her wrists. "Don't touch me! Do you know who I am?" Preston was tackled to the floor, the image of the untouchable patriarch handcuffed in the dirt searing into the minds of the gallery. As they were dragged past the defendant's table, Beatrice locked eyes with Sorey. "You ruin everything," she spat, struggling against the officer. "You ruined my son." Sorey stood up, walking to the railing. The room quieted to hear her response. "I didn't ruin him, Beatrice. Sore said, her voice steady and clear. I loved him. That's why he protected me. You didn't lose your son to a car accident. You lost him years ago when you chose your money over his happiness. Beatrice gaped, silenced by the truth, before the heavy doors closed on her dynasty. Arthur exhaled, a tired smile touching his lips. Liam did it, my dear. We just delivered the message. 2 weeks later, the sun shone over the lakeside estate. The movers were back, but this time they were returning the furniture. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. The legal battle was technically over, and with the Shadow Trust unlocked, Sore was wealthy beyond imagination. But her focus wasn't on the millions. She sat in the study, the room where Beatrice had plotted her demise, holding a small envelope Arthur had found in the safety deposit box. It was a letter. My dearest Soph, if you are reading this, my parents have shown their true colors. I'm sorry I had to prepare for this. I know you never cared about the money. That's why I fell in love with you. You were the only real thing in a world full of fakes. The money in the trust is yours. Use it to paint. Use it to travel. Use it to build that animal shelter you always talked about. Do not let the Montgomery name weigh you down. I will always be with you, in the wind on the lake, and in the freedom you now have. Love always, Liam. Tears flowed down Sore's face, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. She had won the war, not because of the house or the money, but because Liam had been holding her hand from beyond the grave. He had ensured she would never be a victim. Sore wiped her eyes and touched the frame of Liam's portrait above the mantel. I'm going to build that shelter, she whispered to him, and I'm going to name it after you. She walked out of the room, leaving the door open, ready to start the rest of her life. What a roller coaster. Sore's journey from a grieving widow to a powerhouse of justice proves that the quietest people often fight the hardest battles. The Montgomerys thought their wealth put them above the law, but they forgot that truth and love always leave a paper trail. Liam's foresight wasn't just about assets. It was a final, enduring act of romance. What did you think of Liam's Shadow Trust? Do you think Beatrice and Preston got what they deserved? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a satisfying twist, and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Thanks for watching.